Oh boy, opening night. I have not seen a show in ever that has left me as baffled as I was after opening night. This weird, almost psychological musical is adapted from the film of the same name. And when you watch this musical, you kind of realize that this material isn't really suited to the stage, let alone becoming a musical. So why was opening night such a struggle for me to get through? Let's find out. But if you haven't seen my face before, hi, I'm Ellie, I talk about theatre. I am the most chaotic theatre person on the internet. I do reviews, I do discussions, I do video essays, and if any of that sounds interesting to you, please consider hitting like and subscribe. It really helps me, it helps out the channel. But let's talk about opening night. I think practically all of the issues of opening night come from the actual material of the show. This book is the show's biggest problem by far. Mainly because it's very messy in its approach to the story. Opening night surrounds Myrtle. She is an actress preparing to open a new Broadway show, The Second Woman. During the run of previews, she meets a 17-year-old fan who promptly gets hit by a car and passes away. And the entire show is trying to be a deep dive into this woman's psyche as she deals with this while still trying to put on the show. However, to say that the play is successful at this would be incorrect, because the end product just feels like it's trying too hard to be really deep and psychological, so much so that the end product just kind of feels like it says absolutely nothing. It's really hard to understand or even guess what this musical is trying to go for or what it's trying to be, because it feels so muddled in its approach that you can't really gauge it. And I think a lot of the problems comes from this plot. This plot, on paper, should work. However, a lot of it isn't given enough weight for us as an audience to really engage with it. Take the actual moment where the girl passes away. We get this scene where they meet each other for the first time, we get a brief introduction to her, we get a sense that she's really nervous, and then 5 seconds later she's dead. But the staging of this moment happens so quick and doesn't put enough emphasis onto the fact of how big this moment is for Myrtle, that it just kind of falls a bit flat. She runs to the back of the stage, she closes the door, we hear the sound of a car crash, and then this window just gets covered in blood. This fake blood that looks absolutely nothing like blood. And then everyone else is so apathetic towards Myrtle in this moment. No one is actually diving into the impact of what's actually just happened for us to truly understand. The entire musical hinges on us connecting to this one moment and understanding the absolute pain and shock this causes Myrtle, but the staging doesn't match this, and because of that, we as an audience struggle to care about it. What's more, this play just doesn't really explore these characters. We have these characters who have a lot of potential layers, but the musical doesn't dive into them, and they all feel one-dimensional, especially the female characters in this show. I don't understand anyone's character motivations. I don't get why they're doing what they're doing. I don't really understand the reasons behind Myrtle's spiral. And the entire creative team is so cold and so lacking in any dynamics that you just kind of struggle to root for anyone. And the play tries to deal with it in this very psychological way, so much so that you're questioning whether any of this actually happened. The musical doesn't really give you any answers to this. It doesn't really explore any of these really interesting questions that it could do. So much so that you end up questioning whether this material actually suits musical theatre. But we'll touch on how underdeveloped the music is a little bit later. A lot of this is Act 1. Act 1 is very slow moving and strange, and you don't really connect to the characters. And then Act 2 falls into this kind of ghost story where we start seeing Nancy manifest in Myrtle's mind. And again, there's interesting ideas here. There's one sequence where Nancy goes on stage instead of Myrtle and tries to lead the scene, but obviously she's just a figment of Myrtle's imagination, so nobody else can actually see her on stage, but Myrtle thinks she's doing an amazing job. But so many of these scenes lack an actual impact. I'm not sure what they're trying to say about Myrtle, about the play, about the production team. And you end up just sitting there, wondering the most obvious question, the one thing that it should be on the front of your mind through this entire show. Why have they not fired Myrtle yet? Myrtle has screwed up royally 3 previews. Three shows. She's refused to go on. She's changed the script. She's done everything that she possibly could to screw up this show. Why have they not put an understudy on? Why is no one on this production team trying to help her? Why is no one even, like, remotely worried about the spiral that Myrtle is going through? All of these characters are so, like, self-centered that none of them are actually doing the really obvious thing. It's so confusing. I don't understand what it's trying to go for. It feels like it thinks it's doing something really, really interesting, but it's so lost in the psychological that it's not actually tackling any of the themes or the issues or the ideas within this musical. And then it ends with, like, this really joyous bells song where they're all celebrating Broadway. What? Like we didn't just witness loads of flaws within the system, loads of, like, just absolute apathy from everyone in this production team. Why are we singing a song celebrating Broadway when we've literally seen the worst of Broadway? It's so strange. It's so baffling to watch. It is just this mismatch story that doesn't really make any sense, that seems like it's trying to do something psychological and deep, but doesn't actually explore anything. It's so hard to describe exactly why this play doesn't work, because it feels like it just doesn't work at a fundamental level. And if the plot was messy, Ivo Van Hove's direction matches that. Ivo Van Hove is a fantastic director, but here it feels like it's a little bit lost. A lot of the musical hinges on filming. We're seeing more and more shows start to come to the forefront in musical theatre, doing filming on stage. And a lot of the time this can work if it's used efficiently. Oklahoma has, like, 2 scenes where they film. Sunset Boulevard had a lot of filming, but that is fundamentally about a film. And the moments that they choose to film are very methodical. It's close-ups, it's different moments, it's characters that we don't really see in the show. It feels very purposeful with what it films, and it never really feels like it's overbearing. It's a nice balance between what's being filmed and what's being presented on stage. Whereas opening night kind of just films everything to a point where I didn't even really watch what was happening on stage. I was just watching the entire thing through what was being filmed. The filming and the staging didn't complement each other. And because of that, it just ends up feeling a little bit distracting from what this musical is actually about. The one thing I'll give to this filming, the one positive I'll say, is that it does make the fairly small Gielgud stage feel a lot more expansive. We have all these different areas that they get to explore, backstage, to the side, areas of the stage that we don't really get to see, that they do manage to bring you into. But with how much is filmed, it might as well not have been live. I think a better approach for what this show should have done was use the actual filming, the actual screen, to show us backstage while we're watching stuff happening on stage. A lot of the time, what's being filmed is what we're actually seeing in front of us. What's the point of that? if you use that camera crew to show the reactions of the director, there's a really interesting sequence in this song where we see the reactions while Myrtle is kind of screwing up on stage of the writer of the show. This is a nice contrast where you're seeing something unfold in front of you while you're seeing the chaos and the panic backstage up at the back. If the musical decided to kind of contrast these two different areas a little bit more, it would have felt a little bit more natural and felt less like we're just relying on watching a screen the entire time. Because that's what this is missing. It's missing that purpose. It's missing that idea. And because it feels a little bit purposeless, when it's actually trying to do interesting ideas, they still end up falling a bit flat. As previously mentioned, there's a scene where Nancy goes on stage, and how they do it is they have this overhead camera, but we don't actually see Nancy on stage, showing the audience that she is a ghost. However, this sequence is pre-filmed, and it was completely out of time to what we were seeing one of the actors doing on stage. We have one actor, Nancy, who's not there, and one actor who is actually there. And they didn't match, so it kind of ruined the illusion of what they were trying to go for. This interesting idea that kind of falls flat because it's not done as slickly as it could be. And then there's the sequence where Myrtle finally starts to try and push the ghost Nancy out of her life. I can see exactly what this scene is trying to do, as it tries to use lighting and different techniques to create this very different effect on stage. However, it is very overbearing. It's these really harsh, flashing lights that are non-stop for about 3 minutes on stage, while we have the filming and the projection on the back and the screen on the back slightly out of time to the action that's happening on stage. This sequence is trying to be a little bit disorienting, but it goes way too far with it. To a point where you really struggle to actually engage with what's happening on stage and end up having to look away because it's literally just this bombardment of these really harsh lights that are just make it hard to watch. And because of that, we really struggle to actually feel the impact of probably the most important scene in this show. It's all very muddled, it has ideas behind it that could work, but again, like the book, it feels like it's going a little bit too far into this weird Twilight Zone that just makes it really hard to connect to at all. And then there's the music. When I heard that Rufus Wainwright was going to be making a musical, I got really excited because he has a very distinct musical style that I think could have really worked for a more traditional musical. This was not the musical for Rufus Wainwright to write, honestly. The funny thing is, when we get a more traditional musical theatre style of song from Wainwright, it actually really works. And that song is Magic. Magic is quite nice. It's cutesy. It's a nice little song that's wrapped up with a bow. All about the feeling of putting on a show. But to say that that song does not work with what this musical is trying to go for would be an understatement. Because nothing else in this show is like that song Magic. It's all of this really strange music that kind of just blends together into a blob. None of it is very memorable. And it really lacks the substance to make it work. We've seen musicals that have been very successful trying to steer away from the typical style of musical theatre. I think a style that would have worked a little bit better for this show would have been something like the music of Dave Malloy in Natasha Pierre and the Great Comet of 1812. That show very purposely has music that doesn't rhyme, that kind of feels a little bit strange and eerie in places. And a lot of the emphasis and a lot of the meaning is put onto the lyrics. I feel like that style would have suited the show a lot more than what we get from Rufus Wainwright here. As I said, when we actually get something a little bit more musical theatre from Wainwright, it really works. And it shows off the cast, it shows off Sheridan Smith's vocals really, really well. But on the whole, that's about it. Which is a real shame. I really want to see Rufus Wainwright go on and write a different musical that's more suited to his talents. But talking of Sheridan Smith, let's talk a little bit about this cast, because they are all really, really trying their best to get something out of this very strange material. Sheridan Smith as Myrtle, again, has like the only song that I really managed to attach to with this show. I think she approaches the challenge of this role really, really well. It's a shame that the material isn't really giving her much to work with. But she still manages to be really captivating in the monologues, trying to give some intentions to Myrtle's actions, which always feel a little bit strange and weird and just coming out of the blue. She does her best to ground this character, and it's very appreciated. Hadley Fraser manages to make an impact as a director. I think the musical is a little bit obsessed with making him weirdly apathetic, but he has some interesting moments with Myrtle that he manages to try and explore a certain dynamic between the two. But it's the relationship with Amy Lennox's character Dorothy, his wife, that I feel like is just criminally underexplored. Just like Fraser, Lennox is really, really trying to get something out of this material, but she gets practically nothing. They're trying to explore the relationship between the two, but there isn't really any material that does that. It very much relies on the dynamic and, well, the lack of chemistry between Fraser and Lennox to show you this very fractured relationship, which manages to be a little bit interesting because of what these two cast members bring to these roles. Nicola Hughes as the writer, Sarah, manages to get a strong moment at the end of Act 1. Something I really want to credit her for is the way that she plays to the camera. There's a lot of intensity there. She's really engaging to watch on that screen. A lot of Sarah's theme is about aging as a woman, and it's very, very, very surface level. But Hughes manages to add a certain coldness to her portrayal that makes her interesting to watch. It is a real common theme across this cast that they're really trying, but there just isn't enough substance to these roles to make them actually very interesting. There's great turns from Benjamin Walker as Maurice, Shira Haas as Nancy, who gets this really nice contrast between the nervous, sweet Nancy we meet at the start and the much more sinister Nancy that we see in Act 2. But it's all lost behind this baffling, nonsensical show that is so hard to describe exactly why it doesn't work. I don't think this show understands its tone. It doesn't really understand what it's trying to go for. And if it does, it really fails to illustrate that to an audience. And because of that, any kind of message just kind of falls so flat. I really wanted to like opening night. There's some ideas here that feel like in any other show could be really interestingly explored. But because it's stuck with this weird psychological style, it just fails to really click. It's a show that I can see being very Marmite, being very you either really like it or really hate it, and seeing the response from other people being so mixed. I think opening night is going to be a show that we're going to be talking about for a while, whether that be a positive or, sadly like me, a negative. But what do you think? Have you seen opening night? Remember that theatre is what's subjective, so if you loved it, tell me why you enjoyed it. I'm so glad that you managed to get something out of a show that I struggled with. Let me know all of your thoughts in the comments down below. If you did enjoy this video, please consider hitting like and subscribe. It really helps me out, helps out the channel. Here's some links to my videos on screen right now, and a link to my Instagram if you want to drop me a follow over there. But that's it for me today, and I hope to see you next time. Bye.